Hey everybody! Welcome to day 9 of our virtual book study. We are on chapter 9. The title is White Fragility in Action. I will be posting a lot of pictures from this chapter because there's a lot of lists, and I think it would be easier for you guys to see in the post the actual lists. All right? Chapter 9, White Fragility in Action. A board president has finally obtained agreement from the school to sponsor racial equity training for his predominantly white teaching staff. But when he hears the workshop's title, he backs away, not liking that the term white is used. When I was a professor of education, my university was situated 10 miles from a city that is roughly 56% Black and Latinx. Our student population was 97% white, and many of them did their internships in the public schools in this city. My department hadn't hired a faculty member of color in 17 years. I repeatedly brought this up as an issue, but silence repeatedly followed. Eventually, a white colleague came to my office and angrily told me, quote, "Every time you bring this up, you are saying that we shouldn't have our jobs." A white man works for an Indian tribe. He consistently lets the native people he works with know how, quote, exhausted he is from, quote, seeing injustice. He doesn't know how much longer he can endure the job. His native coworkers feel pressured to repeatedly console him and encourage him to stay. I receive a call from a virtually all-white organization that is interested in racial equity training. They want to know how I will ensure that the participants will feel comfortable. I have just given a keynote talk on what it means to be white in a society that proclaims that being white means nothing, while remaining deeply separated and unequal by race. The focus of my talk is on how race shapes white identity and the inevitable patterns that result. A white woman who works with Native Americans approaches the event organizer, who is a woman of color. The white woman is furious. Quote, "What about Native Americans? You left out Native Americans." She berates the organizer for several minutes at a volume that I can hear from across the stage. When I intervene, she is calmer, but she chastises me for leaving out Native Americans, who are, quote, "the most oppressed of all." At no point does she acknowledge any aspect of the talk that relates to her as a white person, share any insight she may have gained into her own whiteness, or consider the impact of berating a woman of color who didn't actually give the talk. As a former professor and current facilitator and consultant, I am in a position to give white people feedback on how their unintentional racism is manifesting itself. In this position, I have observed countless enactments of white fragility. One of the most common is outrage. How dare you suggest that I could have said or done something racist? Although these are unpleasant moments for me, they are also rather amusing. The reason I am there in the first place is because I have been hired specifically to do just that. I have been asked to help the members of the organization understand why their workplace continues to remain white, why they are having so much trouble recruiting people of color, and or why the people of color they hire don't stay. At this point in my career, I rarely encounter the kind of open hostility that I was met with in my early days as a facilitator. I attribute this change to the years of experience behind my pedagogy. Of course, I am also white, which makes other white people much more receptive to the message. I am often amazed at what I can say to groups of primarily white people. I can describe our culture as white supremacists and say things like, quote, "All white people are invested in and collude with racism," without my fellow white people running from the room or reeling from trauma. Naturally, I don't walk in and lead with those statements. I strategically guide people to a shared understanding of what I mean by those claims. My own whiteness, coupled with experience and strategy, puts white people's overall reception of me light years beyond how I was received in the early days. White people are receptive to my presentation as long as it remains abstract. The moment I name some racially problematic dynamic or action happening in the room, in the moment, for example, quote, "Sharon, may I give you some feedback? While I understand it wasn't intentional, your response to Jason's story invalidates his experience as a Black man." White fragility erupts. Sharon defensively explains that she was misunderstood and then angrily withdraws while others run in to defend her for re-explaining. Then they re-explain, quote, what she really meant. The point of the feedback is now lost, and hours must be spent repairing this perceived breach. And of course, no one appears concerned about Jason. Shaking my head, I think to myself, you asked me here to help you see your racism. But by God, I'd better not actually help you see your racism. Throughout this book, I have attempted to make visible the inevitable racist assumptions held and patterns displayed by white people conditioned by living in a white supremacist culture. When these patterns are named or questioned, we have predictable responses. The responses begin with a set of unexamined assumptions, which, when questioned, trigger various emotions, which activate some expected behaviors. These behaviors are then justified by numerous claims. These responses, emotions, behaviors, and claims are illustrated in the following example of a recent eruption of white fragility. I was co-leading a community workshop. Because an employer had not sponsored it, the participants had all voluntarily signed up and paid a fee to attend. For this reason, we could assume that they were open and interested in the content. I was working with a small group of white participants when a woman I referred to as Eva stated that because she grew up in Germany, where she said there were no black people, she had learned nothing about race and held no racism. I pushed back on the claim by asking her to reflect on the messages she had received from her childhood about people who lived in Africa. Surely she was aware of Africa and had some impressions of the people there. Had she ever watched American films? If so, what impression did she get about African Americans? I also asked her to reflect on what she had absorbed from living in the U.S. for the last 23 years, whether she had any relationships with African Americans here, and if not, then why not? We moved on and I forgot about the interaction until she approached me after the workshop ended. She was furious and said that she had been deeply offended by our exchange and did not, quote, feel seen. Quote, you made assumptions about me, she said. I apologized and told her that I would never want her to feel unseen or invalidated. However, I also held to my challenge that growing up in Germany would not preclude her from absorbing problematic racial messages about black people. She countered by telling me that she had never even seen a black person, quote, before the American soldiers came. And when they did come, quote, all the German women thought them so beautiful that they wanted to connect with them. This was her evidence that she held no racism. With an internal sigh of defeat, I gave up at that point and repeated my apology. We parted ways, but her anger was unabated. A few months later, one of my co-facilitators contacted Eva to tell her about an upcoming workshop. Eva was apparently still angry. She replied that she would never again attend a workshop led by me. Notice that I did not tell Eva that she was racist or that her story was racist. But what I did do was challenge her self-image as someone exempt from racism. Paradoxically, Eva's anger that I did not take her claims at face value surfaced when the context of a volunteer workshop on racism, which she ostensibly attended to deepen her understanding of racism. Let's start with the common emotional reactions that white people have, and that Eva demonstrated, when our assumptions and behaviors are challenged. Feelings: singled out, attacked, silenced, shamed, guilty, accused, insulted, judged, angry, scared, outraged. When we have these feelings, it is common to behave in the following ways, as Eva did. Behaviors: crying, physically leaving, emotionally withdrawing, arguing, denying, focusing on intentions, seeking absolution, avoiding. Given that these are strong emotions and reactions, they need to be justified. What claims do we make to justify these feelings and behaviors? Some of the following claims suggest that the claimant has been falsely accused. Others suggest that the claimant is beyond the discussion. Quote, I already know all of this. But all of them exempt the person from further engagement or accountability, as Eva's claims exempted her. Claims: I know people of color. I marched in the 60s. I already know all of this. You are judging me. You don't know me. You are generalizing. This is just your opinion. I disagree. The real oppression is class or gender or anything other than race. You are elitist. I just said one little innocent thing. Some people find offense where there is none. You don't do this the right way. You're playing the race card. This is not welcoming to me. You're being racist against me. You are making me feel guilty. You hurt my feelings. You misunderstood me. I don't feel safe. The problem is your tone. I can't say anything right. That was not my intention. I have suffered too. Several of these claims are also made in an email I received through my public website. The following comments are partly excerpted and summarized. The writer opens by saying that according to her assessment of my age, I did not live through the things that she lived through, and therefore, quote, I seriously doubt that there is one single thing that you could tell me about race. She goes on to state her credentials, how she lived through the momentous events of the civil rights movement, studied race and gender in college, is familiar with many famous black feminist writers and black politicians, and has known many black people throughout her life, neighbors, classmates, and colleagues. Further, the author suffers from the same illness that a black friend's sister died from decades earlier. This shared illness appears to be further proof of her alliance with black people. She uses these experiences and relationships as evidence that she has been able to shed any racism she may have had. All the things you say whites absorb, I got them wrong. I got them wrung out of me through my life and my education. Her next move takes race off the table and replaces it with an oppression she experiences, sexism. No, I don't want to talk about race anymore. I want to talk about gender. She ends by closing down any further engagement, saying that she likely wouldn't read any email I would send her. I am confident that some of the feelings, behaviors, and claims illustrated in this email message will be familiar to white readers. We have either made some version of them ourselves or have heard others make them. Yet, as with so many aspects of racism, we rarely examine or consider them problematic. So let's go under the surface and examine the framework of assumptions many of these claims rest on. Assumptions. Racism is simply personal prejudice. I am free of racism. I will be the judge of whether racism has occurred. My learning is finished. I know all I need to know. Racism can only be intentional. My not having intended racism cancels out the impact of my behavior. My suffering relieves me of the racism or racial privilege. White people who experience another form of oppression cannot experience racial privilege. If I am a good person, I can't be racist. I am entitled to remain comfortable, have this conversation the way I want to. How I am perceived by others is the most important issue. As a white person, I know the best way to challenge racism. If I am feeling challenged, you are doing this wrong. It's unkind to point out racism. Racism is conscious bias. I have none, so I am not racist. Racists are bad individuals, so you are saying that I am a bad person. If you knew me or understood me, you would know I can't be racist. I have friends of color, so I can't be racist. There is no problem. Society is fine the way it is. Racism is a simple problem. People just need to. My worldview is objective and the only one operating. If I can't see it, it isn't legitimate. If you have more knowledge on the subject than I do, you think you're better than me. Now that we have identified the underlying assumptions that engender these feelings, behaviors, and claims, let's consider how they function. Functions of white fragility. Maintain white solidarity. Close off self-reflection. Trivialize the reality of racism. Silence the discussion. Make white people the victims. Hijack the conversation. Protect a limited worldview. Take race off the table. Protect white privilege. Focus on the messenger, not the message. Rally more resources to white people. These behaviors and the assumptions undergirding them do not, in fact, present the claimant as racially open. Quite the opposite. They block any entry point for reflection and engagement. Further, they block the ability to repair a racial breach. They fan racial divisions as they seethe with hostility and resentment. In summary, the prevailing white racial assumptions and the behaviors they engender protect racism. Thank you for watching.